The text arrived at 3:17 in the morning, the vibration of my phone jolting it to life within the shadows of our Boston brownstone. Perhaps Francis assumed I was asleep, or maybe the 13-hour difference in time from Bali had disoriented him. Regardless, his message shimmered with unapologetic delight. Sold our Cape Cod vacation home and moved all our funds to begin my new existence with Jessica. Have fun being without a home, LOL. Do not attempt to contact me, changing my number tomorrow. I gazed at the display, the blue glow lighting up my face in the pre-dawn darkness. After 3 decades of matrimony, this constituted his farewell, a text message ending with LOL. I placed my phone on the bedside table and inhaled deeply. My name is Alice Mercer, and at 52, I hadn't anticipated beginning anew. However, I also hadn't anticipated my spouse of 30 years would empty our accounts and abscond with his 29-year-old fitness instructor. Though truthfully, I had harbored suspicions for months. The initial indication was Francis's abrupt fascination with physical fitness the previous spring. After years of disregarding my subtle advice about health checkups, he'd suddenly joined an exclusive fitness center and started vanishing for 2-hour workout sessions 3 times weekly. By summertime, those sessions had become daily, and he'd shed 30 pounds. "You should be pleased for me," he'd retort whenever I inquired about the escalating credit card expenses. "I'm at last looking after myself." Subsequently, there were the password modifications on our financial accounts, the confidential phone calls, and the business excursions that strangely coincided with his trainer Jessica's Instagram updates from the identical locations. I'm not inherently confrontational. As a hospital administrator, I've established my profession on meticulous observation, documentation, and strategic planning. Therefore, instead of making accusations, I began noting down observations, gathering proof, and seeking advice from professionals. When Francis indicated he was organizing a solo wellness retreat in Bali, I understood it was time to activate the protective strategy I'd spent months formulating with my lawyer. I retrieved my phone and composed a concise response. "Review your account status." I could visualize Francis presently, lounging in some opulent villa, Jessica beside him, self-satisfiedly believing he'd succeeded. I pictured his expression when he eventually checked his accounts and discovered nothing. Well, not precisely nothing. He would encounter notifications of the emergency court directives I had submitted 3 weeks prior, freezing our shared assets after presenting proof of his infidelity and intended financial desertion. He would learn that the successful transfer he believed he'd executed had been seized and deposited into a court-supervised account. I didn't anticipate an instantaneous reply. Francis had consistently been self-assured to the extent of hubris. He wouldn't examine the account balance immediately. He'd presume his scheme had functioned impeccably. I prepared a cup of tea and settled at my desk, opening the file labeled Francis Documentation. Inside was the timeline I'd constructed over the preceding 6 months, a detailed record that had ultimately safeguarded our family's financial well-being. It had commenced with the credit card statements. Francis had perpetually been prudent with finances, examining every expenditure I made. Thus, when he commenced spending $500 weekly at Elite Training Solutions without discussion, I recognized something was amiss. Subsequently, there were the sporadic cash withdrawals, $2,000 here, $3,000 there, always just below the threshold that would activate a notification from our bank. My initial action had been to discreetly consult with Diane, our family attorney, who suggested I commence accumulating proof without confrontation. "Document everything," she counseled. "If he's contemplating what I suspect he is, we'll require a robust paper trail." Consequently, I did. I photographed financial statements, documented dates of atypical withdrawals, and made duplicates of our property deeds. I engaged a forensic accountant who uncovered that Francis had inaugurated a separate bank account 3 months previously. Most incriminating of all, I discovered draft emails to a real estate agent concerning covertly listing our beach house, a property that had been in my family for generations. The pivotal moment arrived when I overheard a phone conversation while Francis believed I was at work. I'd returned home prematurely with the migraine and was resting in our bedroom when I heard him in his office, speaking in the hushed, intimate tone he'd formerly employed with me. "Jessica, darling, it's all materializing," he stated. "The beach house should sell swiftly. Alice is oblivious. Once that capital reaches our account, I'll transfer everything to the offshore account we established. By the time she comprehends, we'll be residing the dream in Bali." I'd remained perfectly motionless as my spouse of 30 years schemed to leave me impoverished. The subsequent day, I presented everything to Judge Martinez, who had witnessed sufficient instances of these cases to discern the pattern. The emergency asset protection order had been authorized instantaneously, placing all our shared assets under provisional court oversight. Any endeavors to transfer substantial sums would be automatically flagged and detained. The morning light was beginning to permeate through the curtains now. Our offspring, Thomas and Elise, would be contacting soon. They were aware of everything. I'd sat them down 3 days prior to elucidate what their father was intending and the legal measures I'd undertaken. At 27 and 24, they were sufficiently mature to comprehend betrayal, although the anguish in their eyes had nearly shattered me. My phone vibrated once more. It was an alert from our banking application. Someone was endeavoring to gain access to the account from a foreign IP address. Francis was ultimately examining his balance. My phone rang a quarter of an hour later. The screen exhibited Francis's number. Evidently, he hadn't altered it yet. As threatened, I allowed it to ring 4 times, utilizing the moments to compose myself before responding. "Alice, what in the world did you do?" Francis's voice was a blend of fury and apprehension, the sound of his paradise disintegrating around him. "Good morning, Francis," I responded composedly. "I observe you inspected the accounts." "This is my money," he exclaimed. "You possess no entitlement to—" "Our money," I rectified him, "from our 30-year union, capital we conserved collectively for our retirement and the children's futures." "I'll contest this," he menaced, his voice descending to a harsh whisper. I could envision him distancing himself from Jessica, endeavoring to conceal the unfolding calamity. "You won't succeed with this." "I've already succeeded in safeguarding what's rightfully mine," I stated. Judge Martinez was particularly intrigued by the recorded discourse where you discussed, and I quote, "leaving Alice with nothing while we luxuriate in Bali. The beach house transaction has been invalidated incidentally. The purchasers were exceedingly comprehending when their lawyer obtained the court directive." The silence on the opposite end was interspersed solely by Francis's labored breathing. Subsequently, I heard a female voice in the background, posing inquiries, growing progressively agitated. "Is that Jessica?" I inquired. "You might desire to inform her that the offshore account you established has additionally been frozen, and the authorities have been apprised regarding potential tax evasion." "You've been surveilling me, kya?" Francis finally managed, his voice devoid of emotion. "No, I've been safeguarding myself from your deliberate treachery," I retorted. "There's a distinction." I heard muffled discord on the opposite end, Jessica's voice escalating in both volume and intensity. Their aspiration of subsisting on my family's resources was dissipating in real time. "Francis," I continued, "the court has designated an emergency hearing for Monday. You're mandated to be present either in person or via video conference. Your passport has been flagged, so I advise you to make provisions to return." "Flagged? What does that signify?" The apprehension in his voice was now discernible. "It signifies that while you can depart Bali, you'll be apprehended when you endeavor to enter any nation other than the United States. The judge was apprehensive you might endeavor to abscond with marital assets." The muffled discord in the background was intensifying. I could discern Jessica uttering something concerning commitments and squandering my time. "I've emailed all the court records to you," I stated. "Diane proposed I additionally copy your sibling, Michael, given he's a legal representative. He contacted me this morning, incidentally. He's disillusioned." That was an understatement. Michael had been incensed, volunteering to fly to Boston forthwith to assist me in navigating the legal proceedings. "My brother has lost his sanity," he'd stated. "Dad would be mortified." "Alice, wait." Francis's voice had altered now, desperation superseding resentment. "We can resolve something. We will, through the appropriate legal channels," I retorted. "I advise you to procure a competent legal representative. Oh, and Francis, the children are aware of everything. They've scrutinized the evidence. They've read your text." The subsequent 48 hours unfurled like a slow-motion vehicular collision, one that I was observing from a secure distance. Francis attempted to call 17 additional times that day. I responded only once more, informing him that all subsequent communication should proceed through our legal representatives. Following that, I forwarded his calls. Elise clasped my hands supportively. Both our offspring had insisted on accompanying me to the law office, forming a cohesive front as we navigated this agonizing chapter. 2 hours subsequently, Francis's newly retained legal representative contacted Diane. They petitioned for an emergency meeting prior to the hearing, a final endeavor to negotiate. "They're proffering a settlement," Diane elucidated after the call. "Francis is amenable to allowing you to retain the beach house if you'll rescind the emergency directives and consent to a swift, discreet divorce." "Allow me?" I reiterated, the ludicrousness almost inducing laughter. "The beach house that's been in my family for 4 generations?" "Precisely," Diane nodded. "It's not a sincere proffer. They were probing to ascertain what you might accede to." "Inform them we'll encounter them in court," I stated resolutely. That evening, as I was preparing for slumber, my phone rang with Francis's sibling's number. "Alice, I'm with Francis," Michael stated, his voice strained. "He's requesting to converse with you prior to tomorrow's hearing. I've counseled against it, but he's adamant." I inhaled deeply. "Place him on speaker, but remain in the room, Michael." "Alice." Francis's voice sounded coarse, vanquished. "This has all spiraled out of control. I made a dreadful misjudgment." "Which misjudgment precisely?" I inquired composedly. "Scheming to embezzle our savings, endeavoring to vend my family's beach house, or texting me that I should relish being homeless?" "I wasn't thinking judiciously," he stammered. "Jessica." She made everything appear feasible. A new existence, a fresh commencement. However, she's departed now. The instant she comprehended there wasn't any capital, she vanished. "How astonishing," I remarked sardonically. "I desire to return home," he stated, his voice fracturing. "We can surmount this." 30 years, Alice. Doesn't that signify something? For a fleeting moment, I reminisced about the youthful man I'd espoused. Ambitious, charismatic, brimming with aspirations we were going to construct collaboratively. However, that man had vanished long ago, supplanted by someone amenable to annihilating me, financially and emotionally, without a second thought. "It signified something," I retorted softly. "That's why I documented everything so meticulously. That's why I safeguarded what we constructed collaboratively, and that's why I'll encounter you in court tomorrow." Following the call's conclusion, I sat on the periphery of our bed, my bed now, and permitted myself a moment of sorrow for the matrimony I'd believed we possessed. Tomorrow would necessitate all my fortitude, all my decorum. The courthouse was imposingly formal, all polished marble and reverberating corridors. I sat beside Diane at the plaintiff's table, my posture erect, hands clasped composedly on the burnished wood surface. Thomas and Elise sat directly behind me, while Michael had positioned himself midway between our table and where Francis would sit, a visual declaration of his divided allegiances, but ultimate endorsement of the veracity. When Francis entered with his legal representative, I was startled by his mien. The self-assured, tanned man who had departed for Bali 3 weeks prior appeared haggard and diminished. He endeavored to capture my attention, but I maintained my gaze forward, concentrating on Judge Martinez as she entered the courtroom. "We're here on the matter of Mercer versus Mercer," the judge commenced, examining the documentation before her. I observed the provisional asset protection directives were promulgated 3 weeks prior, predicated on evidence of endeavored deception and financial desertion. Francis's legal representative, an assertive litigator named Gregory Powell, immediately stood. Your Honor, my client desires to contend that there has been a grave misunderstanding. The text message in question was dispatched in imprudent judgment, but was never intended. Judge Martinez interjected. Mr. Powell, I've examined the comprehensive documentation, encompassing recorded discourses, email drafts concerning the unauthorized sale of jointly possessed property, and multiple endeavors to gain access to frozen accounts after court directives were promulgated. Let's not squander this court's time with implausible elucidations. Powell sat down, chastened. Francis appeared to diminish further in his seat. The hearing proceeded systematically. The forensic accountant presented his discoveries, demonstrating how Francis had methodically withdrawn nearly $887,000 in diminutive amounts over 4 months. The real estate agent testified via video conference concerning Francis's directives to vend the beach house without my awareness. Most damning was the evidence from Francis's own devices: the emails, the offshore account establishment, the discourses with Jessica, scheming their new existence. When Francis ultimately took the stand, he endeavored a strategy of contrition. I made a dreadful misjudgment, Your Honor, a midlife crisis that spiraled out of control. I never genuinely intended to leave my spouse impoverished. Yet your text message explicitly stated, "Enjoy being homeless," Judge Martinez noted, peering over her spectacles at him. I was exhibiting for Jessica. Francis conceded, his voice scarcely audible. I desired to impress her. By menacing to render your spouse of 30 years homeless? The judge's tone made it manifest how she perceived this elucidation. Following 3 hours of testimony, Judge Martinez delivered her verdict. The court discovers irrefutable evidence of endeavored deception and financial desertion. The provisional directives freezing all marital assets will persist in effect pending conclusive divorce proceedings. Additionally, she continued, fixing Francis with a stern gaze, the court discovers Mr. Mercer in contempt for his multiple endeavors to circumvent these directives after notification. She assigned a court-designated financial custodian to supervise all marital assets during the divorce process and mandated Francis to relinquish his passport. Most significantly, she authorized my petition for exclusive utilization of our Boston residence and the Cape Cod beach house during proceedings. Mr. Mercer, she concluded, the court takes an exceedingly dim perspective of endeavors to conceal marital assets or deliberately impoverish a spouse. You're fortuitous that Mrs. Mercer unearthed your schemes before you succeeded. As we gathered our belongings to depart, Francis approached, disregarding his legal representative's endeavor to impede him. Alice, please, he commenced, his voice fracturing. Where am I supposed to reside? I gazed at him directly for the inaugural time that day. That's a query you should have pondered prior to informing me to relish being homeless. I'm certain you'll devise something. 6 months following the court hearing, I sat on the veranda of the Cape Cod beach house, observing the October sunset embellish the water in hues of gold and crimson. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, terminating our 30-year union with the stroke of a judge's pen. The conclusive settlement had been equitable but resolute. The court bestowed the beach house upon me outright, plus 70% of our retirement funds and investments, citing Francis's deliberate endeavor to defraud. Francis obtained the smaller of our 2 vehicles and sufficient liquid assets to procure modest lodging. He'd been mandated to defray my legal expenditures in their entirety. Mom? Elise materialized at my side, the sea breeze tousling her hair. Thank you, darling. I accepted the steaming mug, enfolding my hands around its warmth as the evening air chilled. Thomas emerged from within, phone in hand. Uncle Michael contacted. Dad's ultimately located an apartment. He commences his new employment at the community college next week. I nodded, experiencing neither elation nor despondency at the intelligence. Francis had forfeited his executive position following the scandal. His former enterprise desired no association with someone who had endeavored such deliberate financial deception. "Are you all right?" Elise inquired, scrutinizing my countenance. "I am," I retorted, astonished to discover it was veracious. I never desired Francis to endure. I merely desired to safeguard what was rightfully ours. As the waves lapped delicately against the shore, I comprehended that while Francis had forfeited nearly everything, I had acquired something unanticipated. Fortitude I never comprehended I possessed, and a more lucid vision of the existence I desired to construct moving forward. 1 year to the day following receipt of Francis's callous text, I stood at the rostrum in Boston University's conference center, addressing a room brimming with attentive countenances. The event, Financial Security After Betrayal, had attracted over 200 attendees, predominantly women over 50 confronting circumstances analogous to mine. Preparation isn't paranoia, I informed the audience. Documentation isn't mistrust. They're modalities of self-preservation that everyone merits. Following my case's coverage in the Boston Globe, I'd obtained dozens of missives from women who had undergone financial exploitation but hadn't comprehended how to discern it or safeguard themselves. Their narratives had galvanized me to collaborate with Diane and several financial specialists to formulate this workshop series. In the front row sat Thomas and Elise, both beaming with pride. Beside them was Michael, who had become an unforeseen confederate and companion throughout the divorce. In the months since finalizing my divorce, I had discovered purpose in assisting others navigate comparable circumstances. As for Francis, I had learned he was gradually reconstructing his existence. The final update from Michael mentioned he was instructing business ethics at a community college, an irony not unheeded by anyone in our kindred. Jessica had ostensibly proceeded to another affluent target in Florida. Following the presentation, as individuals lined up to pose inquiries, an older woman clasped my hand firmly. "My spouse of 42 years is scheming something analogous," she murmured. "Thanks to you, I've already engaged a legal representative and documented everything." Her words substantiated everything: the anguish, the public exposure, the arduous determinations. What Francis had intended as my ruination had instead metamorphosed into a cornerstone for aiding others. As I drove homeward along the familiar coastal route to Cape Cod, I sensed something that had been absent for an extended duration: tranquility. Not because Francis had confronted repercussions, but because I had discovered fortitude I never comprehended I possessed. Occasionally, the most potent retort to malevolence isn't reprisal, it's resilience,